Welcome back to English Through Historical Story, where fascinating tales from history help you improve your English skills. If you're looking to boost your listening comprehension and vocabulary, you're in the right place. Remember, to make the most of this video, here's a tip. Watch it first without subtitles. Challenge yourself to understand as much as possible. Then, watch it again with subtitles to catch the parts you missed. Finally, after a few days, re-watch the video to track how much you've improved. Trust me, you'll be surprised at how far you can go. Now let me take you back to one of the most shocking and thought-provoking psychological experiments ever conducted, the Milgram Experiment. In the early 1960s, the world was still trying to come to terms with the horrors of World War II. People were asking, how could ordinary men and women have participated in the atrocities of the Holocaust? Many of the Nazi soldiers, during the Nuremberg trials, had claimed they were just following orders. But could that really be true? Were they merely acting under coercion, or was there something deeper about obedience to authority? Stanley Milgram, a Yale University psychologist, wanted to find out. Could anyone, even normal, everyday people, commit harmful acts simply because they were told to do so by someone in a position of power? And so, in 1961, Milgram designed a shocking and controversial experiment to test this very question. Here's how it worked. Milgram recruited volunteers from various walks of life. These participants believed they were taking part in a study about learning and memory. In the experiment, each volunteer was asked to play the role of a teacher, while an actor, who they thought was another participant, played the role of a learner. The learner was strapped to a chair in another room and hooked up to electrodes. The teacher was seated in front of a machine with a series of switches labeled with increasing levels of voltage, from 15 volts all the way up to a terrifying 450 volts. The teacher was told to administer an electric shock to the learner each time they gave a wrong answer to a question. The shocks were meant to increase in intensity with each mistake. But here's the catch. The learner wasn't actually being shocked. It was all part of the setup. The learner was an actor, and the real experiment was to see how far the teacher, the participant, would go. Now let's talk about these voltage levels because they're important. At 15 volts, the learner would feel a mild tingling sensation, something you might experience from static electricity. At 75 volts, the shock would cause discomfort, enough to make someone wince. By 120 volts, the learner would feel real pain, equivalent to a strong muscle contraction. At 300 volts, the learner would be in extreme agony, screaming in pain and begging for the experiment to stop. And at 450 volts, it could be fatal. As the voltage increased, the actor began to scream in agony. At 300 volts, the learner would pound on the wall, pleading for the experiment to end, and eventually they would fall completely silent, suggesting they had been seriously harmed or even killed. Now put yourself in the shoes of the participant, the teacher. You hear the person in the other room crying out, begging you to stop. What would you do? Most people think they would stop. After all, how could anyone continue under such circumstances? But here's where the Milgram experiment gets truly disturbing. The authority figure in the room, the experimenter wearing a white lab coat, would calmly say, "Please continue." The experiment requires that you continue. You have no other choice. You must go on. And the shocking result? 65% of participants, the majority, went all the way to 450 volts. They delivered what they believed to be potentially lethal shocks to another human being, simply because they were told to do so by an authority figure. Why would ordinary people do this? Milgram believed that when people are placed in a situation where they feel subordinate to authority, They shift their sense of responsibility. Instead of seeing themselves as personally responsible for their actions, they feel they are just following orders. The famous phrase, "I was just doing what I was told," echoes this psychological shift. What's even more unsettling is that Milgram conducted this experiment multiple times, and the results were consistent. No matter the country, the culture, or the background of the participants, the majority still followed orders. But the real reason Milgram's experiment had such a powerful impact is because it touched on something deeply unsettling. It wasn't just about people following orders. It was about understanding how the horrors of the Holocaust could happen. The experiment seemed to suggest that, under the right conditions, anyone might be capable of carrying out harmful acts, even if they didn't agree with them. The experiment wasn't just a theoretical test. It had real consequences. Many of the participants who went through the experiment were visibly distressed. Some trembled, sweated, and even laughed nervously during the process. The psychological tension between their conscience and their obedience was clear. So what would you have done? Would you have stopped when the learner screamed in pain at 120 volts? Or would you have gone all the way to 450 volts, just because someone in a white coat told you to? The Milgram experiment remains one of the most profound studies on human obedience and authority. It forces us to ask ourselves, are we as independent in our actions as we like to think? Or can the power of authority push us to cross lines we'd never imagine? At the end of the day, the Milgram experiment wasn't just about shocking individuals. It was about understanding the shocking truth of human behavior. Thank you for watching this episode of English Through Historical Stories. Remember, this is not just about learning history. It's about improving your English while exploring stories that make us think, question, and reflect. If you found this story fascinating, leave a comment below and let us know what you think. Would you have continued in the Milgram experiment? And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next video. Keep learning and keep exploring the incredible stories that shaped our world. Thank you.